Welcome back to the Yoga Life channel, and it's us again, Katie, Rose, and myself, Henrike, and we're looking forward to having a chat to you today about finding balance in your life and working with who you truly are rather than trying to be someone or something that you're not. And Katie is a very amazing expert on Ayurveda, and the whole premise of Ayurveda is to find balance and to strengthen you in who you are and in your own unique constitution rather than going against your own grain. So, Katie, what do you have to share with us? Like, how can we strengthen ourselves and our own authenticity and our own unique expression of self?
Yeah, so Ayurveda, which is the native or indigenous Indian natural medicine model, very closely linked to yoga, it's often called the sister science of yoga, has a lot to say about this idea of amplifying our own individual, unique, constitutional strengths and not wasting our time and energy on that which is not our calling. So we can think about that in terms of the idea of dharma meaning what it is you're really called to do in this life, like what your service is, what your passions are, what your skills are, what you're naturally good at. And so many of us spend a lot of time trying to be good at things that don't really call us for whatever reason. Some of that might be society's pressure. It could be pressure from parents, school, or self-imposed expectations. And then the flip side to that is that we also often don't celebrate enough or kind of honor enough the natural strengths and the natural abilities that we have for fear of seeming like an egomaniac or seeming like we're kind of self-important. And so what Ayurveda has done for me is really give me the tools and the language and a kind of framework, a paradigm to work within that enables figuring out what those strengths are, what are the things I want to amplify and support the people around me to amplify, and also what it is I can let go of, what it is not for me in this lifetime to kind of push for.
Exactly. And a lot of those qualities have positive and negative expressions as well. For example, I used to almost reject within myself that I'm a bit of a talker. I talk a lot. It's just what I do. And I used to carry some guilt and shame around this, thinking like I'm, too chatty or too much of this, too much of that. Versus at some point finding it's like, no, actually that might be a good quality, and embracing that and channeling into something productive rather than it coming all out in all the wrong places. So talk to me about that. It's about finding the positive expression of your skills, right?
Yes, and it will depend often on, especially for something that's been a thread throughout your whole life, it might depend on some of the messaging that you receive when you're young. So 100%. It could be that somebody says some small comment to you at some point like, oh, you're a bit of a chatterbox or something like that. And then you kind of hold that seed with you for such a long time, and it kind of takes on a whole life of its own. I mean, we do this also with our body image as well. Someone will say one thing about, I don't know, the size of your butt or your hair or something at some point, and that kind of is a messaging that gets very deeply embedded. I think particularly for women, I don't want to generalize, but I feel like that's a very strong experience. And on the flip side, if there's something about yourself that you like, that you feel very kind of proud of, like a physical feature that you have, then you might get very attached to that and kind of like almost have some identity caught up in that. Like, if you feel like you've got good hair and then, for example, you cut your hair off or something like that. So it can be both helpful and it can be incredibly unhelpful. But the sense of creating your own idea around what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, rather than being too like a ship on the water, too kind of like moved around by other people's impressions and opinions, especially if they're transient, especially if they're passing.
Absolutely. So how specifically can Ayurveda support us? Like, give me an example from your practice or two, if you have.
Yeah, so it's like you said before, there's both positive and sort of more negative manifestations of each of our different individual constitutional types. So in Sanskrit or in yogic philosophy, we could look at that through the lens of what's known as the good gunas, and the gunas are kind of like different modes of being or different nature within us. And so very broadly speaking, we have tamas, which is the sort of darkness or inertia, rajas, which is the mode of action and passion and activity in the world, and then sattva, which is sweetness. It's our most elevated self.
And balance.
Right? Balance. So we could take a particular characteristic, like let's say just for example, just a random example, the characteristic of being stubborn, right? Now, so stubbornness manifest in tamas, in the darkness or the like the less enlightened state, would be like, I get into an argument and I just won't let go. I'm like a dog with a bone. I won't apologize even when I know I'm wrong. I'm kind of hold on resentfully. That would be a very tamasic expression of the quality of stubbornness, right? And then if we saw stubbornness in a rajasic state, in a kind of like mundane daily life way, that would show up as a kind of, let's say, resilience, like an ability to not give up. Right, so you're doing a particular task, you're going to see it through. You have a quality of not giving up. So that's
and probably also like go though, right? This quality of passion is like you could overexert yourself and exhaust yourself in doing that.
So it could could go either way.
Yeah.
And then when we see the quality of stubbornness in its sattvic state, now it's so interesting because you might think, to be stubborn is always a negative quality, but no. When we look at that quality manifest in sattva, what we'll see is someone who has a lot of discipline. Somebody, for example, that can get up every morning and do their meditation practice, that doesn't give up easily, that really is resilient, right? And so that's the stubborn quality.
Or assertive also.
Could be that too, manifest in sattva. And so what happens is through this framework, we become a lot less judgmental, right? Rather than saying, I have this quality and it's always bad or it's always good, we see it on a spectrum and we see it as ever-changing and evolving. And the skill then is to identify where your areas for personal development and personal growth are, like what are the things I need to really work on in myself, and equally where your strengths are, where your beauty is, where you're able to offer something out that is of great benefit to yourself and to others.
And it's probably in an easy flow rather than requiring a lot of exertion and a lot of effort, etc. Like where does stuff flow easily versus where do I have to work at myself. And at the same time, I like what you're saying because it becomes a very individualized journey of finding what works for you and how you are expressing those specific qualities and how you can elevate yourself rather than being a cookie cutter system, which particularly with self-development, I work in that industry and have been in that industry a long time, it can become a bit of a cookie cutter sort of thing. And Ayurveda brings it back to the individual. And I've definitely seen that in figuring out my own constitution, also honoring what doesn't work for me rather than it's almost like pushing a rock up the hill. Sometimes just seeing like, no, there's a way of, having a similar rock, but not that particular one that actually can go downhill and actually work for me.
Yeah. And we can shift and play with the energy. It's always available to do that. And another way of using this model is to think about it in terms of the parenting journey. So, I've
100%.
got 4 boys, and they're so different. I mean, if ever I had any doubt about the idea that we come in with particular karmas and we kind of live our lives out with already some stuff within us set or predestined, I see it in my children because they've had a very similar upbringing, and yet they're so incredibly different. And what I've learned or what I've seen in the journey of parenting them, which of course is ongoing, is to really celebrate what their strengths are and support that and to nurture that. And likewise, not to push for the things that aren't that they're not naturally inclined to. Not to wish to be something different or to try to sort of like you said, fit everyone into the same cookie cutter mold, but rather to celebrate difference. And so for me, one of the very practical ways that that's manifested in parenting is I used to have this idea that I should treat all of my kids equally, right? Equal for everything. And I've really changed that now. So there might be times when, for example, I spend a bit more money on one versus another, because there's a particular reason for it. Like I just bought a very expensive art set for my 6-year-old because he's a real artist. He loves to draw and paint and create
and
things.
Cut stuff up.
Yeah, it's like his passion. My older kids are not interested in that at all. If I'd spent that amount of money on buying them beautiful art supplies, it would have been wasted. But for him, that's a very precious and valuable investment. Whereas then, you know, the next one up, my second child is super sporty. He loves to play rugby. So, you know, I'm showing up for him in that way, and he's got the rugby equipment and we take him to training, and it's like a real investment in that passion for his, but it's led by the child rather than me coming in with an agenda and saying, I mean, I have some of my own agendas. I would, for example, love a musical child, and it seems like at the moment I don't have one. Maybe the 4-year-old's going to suddenly start playing violin, but at the moment, no. But, you know, to let go of my own agenda and celebrate what they're showing up with in the world. And then to do that for myself too, to say, you know what, I'm really good at this particular thing and I like it. I'm going to do more of that. And I'm not so great at this. This is not my strength. And I'm not going to push myself. I'm not going to try and force the square peg into the round hole. I'm going to celebrate my strengths.
And what a gift to your children to have a parent that is able and willing to do that, and that is willing to see them in their wholeness and in their strengths and cater to that rather than expect them to change and to be different. Absolutely. And I think a lot of us in our generation who are like in our 40s now has been brought up with very clear ideas about how kids should be seen and not heard, all this kind of thing, which was a very different vibe, and to be able to fully express themselves. At the same time, I must say, and I don't know if that goes against what where you're at, let me just throw it in the mix, see what happens, is that I'm a big fan of having like a basic education that's quite rounded, quite humanistic. I don't know if that's a German thing, but I'm a big fan of having quite a broad basic education. But then as kids grow up, once they have this basic set, then cater to their strengths. Like the idea of only going for what are you good at and releasing everything else, I'm not a fan. I think it's again, balance is a thing, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, my personal opinion about that is it very much depends. Again, it's kind of a karmic thing. It depends on what you come in with. So rarely, not very often, but sometimes a person comes in with a very, very set dharma, a very set and clear trajectory. Like, you know, we could think about people, it's usually the artists, like the great, the people that make such a huge contribution to humanity, like Mozart or, you know, Van Gogh or something like that, like people that come in and just have a gift to give to the world, and for them to spend time on anything else is like a waste of that talent that they have. But that's a rare experience. Yeah. For the rest of us, the foundation of variety could be really helpful, because it might help us to figure out some gifts or some interests that we didn't know we had. Like I can see, for example, my 13-year-old starting high school this year, he really loves science. He didn't really do much science in primary school, you know, like test tubes and Bunsen burners and all that kind of fun stuff. And he hadn't been exposed to that up until now. And now he's learning that that's really interesting to him. So, yes, definitely. I think there's also something to be said for this isn't about just only doing things that we love. You know, there are plenty of times that we have to show up and do some hard work that is boring or tedious or repetitive. And there's a lot to be said for that too. Sort of like doing your apprenticeship in life, and going through a little bit of hard work and diligent effort. There's a great reward in that. It's just that if we bring it back to the Ayurveda, what that looks like for each person might be quite different. So, for example, if you're a kapha type, if you're an earth and water type, that type of showing up might look like a steady, consistent work over a period of time. If you're a vata type, which is the air type, then that might look like a very creative burst of energy. It'll look like something that's like a creative project. And then for the pitta type, it's very linear. It's all about kind of planning and creating a very like linear trajectory of I'm here and I want to get to there.
Yeah.
So we'll bring our own quality, but within each one of those Ayurvedic constitutions, we're going to have the opportunity to sometimes have to work through a little bit of resistance and do the work.
Exactly. So how would I very practically, very easily bring a little bit more of that Ayurveda mindset into my life? Like if I think about our audience here and they're interested in seeing, like, give me a couple of specifics of what can I do to find more balance and enhance the journey I'm on and bring my authenticity.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. First of all, going back to this model of the gunas that I spoke about at the very beginning, the idea of the darkness, action, passion, and then sweetness. I think in any given moment we can ask ourselves, where am I sitting in that framework? So I was talking to somebody yesterday and she was talking about challenges she's having feeding her toddler, right? Her toddler doesn't want to eat. And so there's this kind of battle happening around meal times. And we talked about it in the context of this model, and we realized that she was getting stuck in a very tamasic sort of negative spiral of trying to force the kid to eat, and then her child would get upset, and then she'd get upset, and then everyone's upset, and then no one's eating, and it's sort of like a cycle, right? And we, there's 1,000 different examples of the way that particular arguments, difficulties, challenges in our relationships play out. Like if I was to ask you about your relationship with your son, there would be a few little particular loops that you've been around many times, right?
Yes.
We all have that experience. And usually it's heightened with the people we're closest to, kids, partner, your boss, those people that you spend a lot of time with.
Origin.
Right, yes. And so one thing we can do in those moments is ask ourselves, okay, I'm sitting in this really tamasic place. I'm sitting in this place of the darker side of me. How can I change the channel? How can I literally, grabbing the remote control, changing the channel on the TV? How can I change my mentality here? How can I switch into a sweeter vibe? And often what will really help with that, like one of the most practical tools, is taking a pause. It's a timeout. It's like removing yourself from the situation, even just for a few breaths. So in the example of my friend with her toddler, it's like leave the room, take a few deep breaths, reset yourself. I like to do that in some kind of sensory way. So I sometimes will do something like wash my hands with cold water, or I might use an essential oil, or I might put some music on, something that like appeals to one of the senses, listening, fragrance, sensation. It really is very powerful. It's like a pattern interrupter when you get stuck in a groove, and coming back into that kind of with a sweeter attitude.
A conscious intention.
Yes,
that's it. Yeah, absolutely. What else? What are other ways on a very practical level that I can apply in day-to-day life for authentic living? Yeah,
so another way of thinking about it is to think about the elements, the element of earth, fire, water, and air, and to ask yourself in any given moment. We can get into the technicalities of the doshas and the Sanskrit names, but to keep it very simple, to ask yourself, which elemental quality am I most immersed in right now? So, for example, like for me, I'm a pitta person in Ayurveda. I carry a lot of fire. So my natural instinct is going to often be to be impatient, to be angry, to be frustrated, to be quick, to be rushing. Like these are the elemental qualities that I carry through a lot of my life, sometimes without even a need. I find myself all the time habitually rushing when I actually don't need to be in a rush. It's a very ingrained part of my personality. And so then I can check in with that energy and kind of say, why is there so much fire here right now? It's not necessary. And consciously, again, it's a pattern interrupting activity to bring the fire down. And I might do that. Like for me, I love to swim in the ocean because it brings the fire down straight away, or just take a shower. Or have a cool drink.
Yeah, or some cooling essential oil probably
would
like
work as peppermint,
well, right?
something like that. Put it in the diffuser. For someone else, let's say someone who gets very stuck in the earth element, the kapha, sedentary, finding it hard to get motivated, they're going to need the opposite. They need the rocket ship to kind of like come in and bring their energy up.
So what would be ways of doing that?
Well,
Spices?
Again, we can do this in positive or negative ways. So a way that might not necessarily support your health and well-being would be to smash a cup of coffee down, right? Like, and that's what a lot of those people do.
I sometimes do that, for sure.
Right. So if you've got a lot of that kapha earth energy, you want something to kind of bring you up, right? But then other ways would be like for those, that constitution, physical exercise is super important.
Yeah, that constitution is sometimes really not very motivated to do that. Not speaking of experience here.
Yes. And like routine is really helpful, and discipline and making a commitment, sticking to it. Bringing the fire in. So bringing in some spices, bringing in some like cinnamon, ginger, even a little bit of chili for that constitution to elevate
the
a little bit.
Up.
Right. Getting away from being overly like stuck to earth, which is the sedentary energy, and finding lightness. So it sounds silly, but even something like watching some comedy. Like finding a lightness, like and bringing the energy up can be really, really powerful.
Probably getting out of the house. I know that definitely gets me going.
Yeah, going outside. And then the third one is the vata, which is the air element. And what happens with vatas is often they spend a lot of time daydreaming. So we can describe them as people that are kind of often very creative, very spiritual, but also away with the fairies.
And often scatterbrained, right?
All over the shop. So then how do we work with that energy? Well, we celebrate the positive, which is the spirituality, the creativity, but then we anchor it. So we need to find a medium for that creative spirit, an outlet for that, so that it can be
slowing down also, right?
Slowing down and having a clear project. So whether it's, or like a clear channel for the creativity. So it might be music, or it might be writing, or it might be filmmaking, or it might be drawing or painting, but like having a channel. Like I know for you, it was so funny. You were telling me, I loved this, that you were getting so much satisfaction. We were on a phone conversation one time, and you were describing to me that you were getting so much satisfaction from painting a piece of wood, and that you had found this color that you really loved. And because you have this vata quality in you that's very creative and very expressive, something about that act of just painting on the wood with this particular color, I could just hear the joy in your voice.
Color can make me so happy. Like, the right yum. I can. It's almost like a full body sensation. It's not just visual. Absolutely.
So that's
so
a
funny.
perfect example. It's like it seems like such a silly
grounded
thing, but actually that's a really perfect example of a very simple thing that for you is very anchoring and grounding of your creative spirit, and kind of brings you into almost like a meditation.
And it's actually color meditation. I often call it that, and doodling around. It's not even like making amazing paintings. It's just sitting there, splashing color around, and then often really even just very repetitive figures, like circles. It's not even real art, but it has this grounding meditative effect on me. And well put.
Yeah, so for you, that's the perfect example. Whereas for me, that doesn't resonate for me at all. I like to write. Like I just write, like free form writing. I can fill pages and pages and pages that I'll probably never read again or show anyone. But that's like my download. That's my way of kind of anchoring that energy and organizing my thoughts.
Yeah. So I really love this. I like coming to a conclusion and kind of summing this up is how individual Ayurveda is, and how individually it caters to specific people's needs, and how through observing ourselves and what it is that we are already doing, both in the positive and the negative expression, kind of being able to draw conclusions of who we are at this deeper Ayurvedic level, and then what we can do to cater to that and support it and bring it through in the most elevated, uplifting, full of service kind of way.
Absolutely right. And then the flip side to that, noticing when we're going to get stuck in a funk or we're kind of in a negative pattern, and changing the channel on that to something that still honours our constitution, but plays to our strengths rather than the stuff that pulls us down.
And what I love about this is that it's a choice. And again, I mean,
in every moment.
In my coaching world, it's always about, yes, whatever might be going on the outside is going on, but ultimately how you deal with it, what you do with it, and how you behave in moving forward, that's absolutely a choice. And so Ayurveda can help you on that level, bring choice back into the equation and deliberately support yourself from that angle. Yeah. Thank you, Katie. That's been very enlightening and very interesting. If you guys have found it valuable to listen to this and you want to hear more from Katie, her website is bhaktirose.com.au, correct?
Yes.
And she offers both Ayurvedic and other topics that will really support you on this journey. If you like this conversation here on the Yoga Life channel, as always, we'd be very happy if you subscribe to the channel, click the like button, leave comments if you have questions for Katie or if you have anything to share where Ayurveda has enriched your life or where you feel you could use some Ayurvedic wisdom. Please leave a comment and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.